Welcome to Custodian TV. Well, October 2008 is going to be remembered as the month of the big crash. And boy oh boy is there panic and fear all over the newspapers. You just can't avoid it. The news, the newspapers, a worldwide panic and fear mentality, a meltdown they're calling it. It's really quite amazing. And you say to yourself, oh gosh, have we actually seen this before? Well, I remember all too clearly 1987. In fact, it was October 20th, 1987 that the stock market in Australia and around the world fell by nearly 25% in one day. And I think nearly 40% for that particular 2-month period. It was absolute carnage. Jobs were lost, people were in all sorts of dire straits, and yes, it affected the high price of housing, that is the higher end of the market. All the predictions at that time, based on fear, was that residential house prices was going to come off and that people were going to lose their jobs and there's going to be all sorts of carnage in the market. And in fact, if I go back to then, we had double-digit unemployment and double-digit interest rates, nearly 15% interest rates. What's going to happen today? You'll have a little bit of job loss. 4.2% might go to 5.5%, as predicted by most economists, senior bank economists. You'll have interest rates, though, that are actually coming down. Since I last spoke to you, I said that we're forecasting interest rates to come down. No one would have predicted the massive interest rate cut that we got just last week, a full 1%. And last time I spoke to you, we said between now and March, we could have 1 to 1.5% reduction. We got it all in one day. So that's an amazing turnaround. And that really does affect us, because when you think about it, within a 5-week period, we've had 1.25% interest reductions. So on your housing, that is the custodian houses that we own, that'll save us around about $100 a week. That's massive, a massive saving. The prediction is that we could have a further 1.5 to as much as 2% interest rate reduction between now and mid-2009. It really is phenomenal. So when you think about that, we could be in a situation where interest rates come down and property becomes cash flow positive again. Now, 2 things happen when interest rates come down. Obviously, the cost of owning the property comes down significantly, and for us as people who have been negative gearing, we become cash flow positive sooner. But the second thing that happens is that borrowing capacities go up tremendously. And you've got a whole tier of people in the market today looking to purchase who don't currently have the borrowing capacity because they worked out their borrowing capacity based on rates at 9.5%. Today, the rates are early 8%. So they've had a significant windfall there, and where it affects them is if they had a borrowing capacity of around $250,000 to $300,000, their borrowing capacity now could be more like $350,000 to $400,000, and that will compound itself between now and next March when interest rates come off moving further. Why I tell you this is because what Custodian have been doing in southeast Queensland and Melbourne is we've just been mopping up the low end of the market. And we've been doing that because that's where the pressure on rentals has been. And that's where we see the opportunity. And I've spoken to you around the country many, many times and said that the median house price around the country might be around $450,000 to $500,000, depending on what state you're in. We've been buying at $350,000 to $400,000, and some of it even sub $350,000. And that's been our point of difference in so many ways. Where I see the opportunities is to continually be able to do that, but we'll only have a short window of time, because between now and next March, you're going to have potentially 100,000 people come into the market with much higher borrowing capacities. And the biggest market that we'll compete with is actually first home buyers, which chalks up around 150,000 sales a year. Yes, I accept that the high price, the high end of property might come off a little bit. That is the $2, $3, $4 million. And I've always said, even in 7 steps, I always said that that's the area that's under so much scrutiny. And if I go back to the last crash, or I should say recession that we had, it was the high prices in places like Vaucluse, Toorak and Hamilton in Brisbane, the peak suburbs, that they came off 10, 15, 20%. The low end where we are just bumps along. But what I'm actually predicting is prices to actually increase. Why? Because if I go back to 1987, we've got some interesting correlations. Yes, we've had a stock market crash, but nowhere near what happened in 1987 so far. Secondly, we've got a housing shortage, and yes, we had a housing shortage back in 1987. But back in 1987, as I said before, we had double-digit unemployment and double-digit interest rates. Today, we have less than half of both, and we have a massive housing shortage. What am I actually predicting? I'm predicting that prices will rise. Now, in 1988, 89, 90, house prices in Australia went up by over 60%, and it was led in the bottom end as investors pulled out of stocks and went into housing, safe as houses. I'm predicting that the same thing will happen, but it'll be compounded by the fact that we've got first home buyers going to enter that market. So I'm aggressively buying and mopping up as much as we possibly can. I myself and my staff and other people are mopping up as much as we can in that bottom end, and I'd encourage you to do the same. Watch your rentals, because your rents are going to go up, and if you can drive your rents up aggressively and interest rates come down, you'll be cash flow positive in a very short period of time. And that is a great way to duplicate. Thank you for listening to me. Now, where do we go from here? It's time to go back and do some homework on your own portfolio. Start to do some cash flow forecasting those rent rises and interest rate reductions. It'll make a whole big difference to your cash flow and your cash flow outcomes. Then go back and calculate your borrowing capacity today, because it's changed significantly, and also what your borrowing capacity could be in 3 to 6 months. Remember the lag time if you acquire property? So assuming those interest rate reductions. Now, that's going to create a cocktail for you where you're going to see your cash flow improve, but also the opportunity to duplicate sooner rather than later. And of course, if you've got any questions, tackle your consultants with it. If they can't answer anything, they'll certainly forward it on to me, or as you know, I always love to hear from you as well.